The quantum communication array at Mauna Kea Observatory flickered to life at 3:47 Greenwich Mean Time, sending a cascading alarm through every military and scientific monitoring station on Earth. Dr. Elena Rodriguez jerked awake, her hand already reaching for the secure communication tablet before her eyes fully focused. The device vibrated with an urgency that defied its usual clinical precision. "Confirm signal source," she muttered, her fingers dancing across the holographic display. The data stream was impossible. A transmission that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. The identification code was crystal clear. U.S. Prometheus, NX 742. A ship that had vanished without a trace 47 years, 3 months, and 16 days ago. Her office, a Spartan space filled with outdated star charts and memory cubes, suddenly felt impossibly small. Elena had been there when the Prometheus made its fatal jump, the most ambitious quantum fold experiment in human history. She remembered the day with terrifying clarity. A bright flash, a momentary distortion in space-time, and then nothing. Complete radio silence. An entire ship and its crew of 247 had simply winked out of existence. The military had called it a catastrophic experiment. The scientific community labeled it an unprecedented spatial anomaly. Elena knew it was something else entirely. Her personal connection to the Prometheus was more than professional. Her twin brother, Michael Chen, had been the ship's commanding officer. His wife, Sarah Lambert, was the lead quantum physicist. They were the best and brightest humanity had to offer, and they had been swallowed by the darkness between stars. The communication array continued its frantic signaling. This was no standard transmission. The data burst was simultaneously encrypted and wide open, a paradox that defied every known principle of information transfer. Fragments of the message danced across her screen, partially readable, tantalizingly incomplete. Quarantine protocol. Elena spoke into her communication band. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Immediate global lockdown of all quantum communication networks. No external broadcasts. Within minutes, the highest levels of global government would be alerted. Military installations from Beijing to Washington would be placed on maximum alert. The world was about to change, again. A single phrase kept repeating in the transmission, a haunting message that sent a chill down Elena's spine. "We've seen beyond the veil. Humanity is not ready, but we are coming home." The words were not a message. They were a warning. Outside her window, the first hints of dawn began to break over the Hawaiian mountains, but something fundamental had already changed. The ghost of a long-lost ship was speaking, and humanity was about to listen. The first visual confirmation came through the Europa Deep Space Observation Station at 11:23 Eastern Standard Time. What appeared on the screens defied every known law of physics, causing the station's entire staff to fall into stunned silence. The U.S. Prometheus didn't simply arrive. It materialized. One moment, the space near Jupiter was empty, a vast, dark canvas punctuated by the gas giant's swirling storms and the distant pinpricks of its moons. The next moment, the ship existed, as if someone had casually erased a blank space and drawn something impossibly complex in its place. Chief astronomer Dr. Kei Nakamura's hands shook as he adjusted the station's most powerful telescopic array. The ship didn't just appear, it phased into existence, its hull seeming to fold and unfold like a living, breathing entity. Geometric patterns shifted across its surface, creating optical illusions that made the human eye struggle to comprehend what it was seeing. "Electromagnetic interference is off the charts," whispered Sarah Chen, the station's lead communications specialist. Every sensor was going haywire. Quantum fluctuation meters spun wildly. Gravitational sensors recorded impossible readings that suggested the ship was simultaneously in multiple locations and states of existence. Global communication networks began to destabilize. Cell phones flickered. Satellite feeds became distorted. For precisely 7 minutes and 32 seconds, Every electronic device within a radius of 500 kilometers experienced a complete systems anomaly. Military tracking stations from NORAD to the Chinese Space Command scrambled to make sense of the impossible image. The Prometheus wasn't just a ship, it was a dimensional anomaly. Its hull seemed to breathe, to pulse with an inner light that wasn't light at all, but something far more fundamental. Patterns moved across its surface. No, not patterns. Organisms, circuits, something that existed between technological and biological definition. It's generating its own gravitational field, Dr. Nakamura muttered, his voice a mixture of terror and scientific excitement. But that's not possible. The energy requirements would be. He never finished the sentence. The ship began to rotate, but rotate was too simple a word. It seemed to turn inside itself, revealing geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Cameras captured glimpses of impossible angles, surfaces that curved back into themselves, creating visual paradoxes that made trained observers question their sanity. Nearby satellites began to fail, not from damage, but from what appeared to be a systematic absorption of their electronic systems. It was as if the Prometheus was consuming information, drawing electronic signals into itself like a living organism, absorbing nutrients. At the precise moment global communication networks reached maximum confusion, the ship broadcast a single crystal-clear signal. It wasn't a message in any traditional sense. It was a quantum data burst that simultaneously existed and did not exist, a communication that was both encrypted and completely transparent. The signal contained exactly 7 words. "We have returned. Prepare for transformation." And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the Prometheus settled into a stable orbit around Jupiter, waiting. Humanity held its collective breath. The first boarding team approached the Prometheus with a mixture of military precision and barely contained terror. Commander Jack Harper led the expedition, his hand steady but his pulse racing beneath the advanced quantum-shielded protective suit. The airlock interface responded before they could initiate the standard protocol. It simply opened, an invitation that felt more like a challenge. Inside, the ship's interior defied every expectation. It wasn't just a vessel. It was alive. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with a soft bioluminescent glow that shifted between colors humans had no names for. Circuitry and organic matter intertwined in impossible configurations, creating spaces that appeared to reconfigure themselves as the team moved through the corridors. And then they saw the crew. Captain Michael Chen stood at the center of the ship's primary command deck, surrounded by 5 other crew members. They were physically unchanged, the same faces from their original mission photographs, seemingly untouched by the 47 years that had passed since their disappearance. But something was fundamentally different. Their eyes were wrong. Not in any physically grotesque way, but in the depth of perception they contained. Each crew member moved with an uncanny synchronicity, as if they were simultaneously individual and part of a collective consciousness. When they spoke, their voices seemed to overlap, creating a harmonic resonance that made the boarding team's communication systems crackle with interference. "We've been waiting," said Captain Chen. But the words came from everywhere and nowhere, spoken by all of them simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Lambert, the ship's original quantum physicist, stepped forward. Her movement was fluid, almost too smooth to be human. A holographic representation materialized around her. Not a standard projection, but a living, dynamic visualization of quantum equations that danced and transformed with her slightest movement. "Your understanding is insufficient," she said, her voice a complex mathematical theorem made sound. "What you perceive as reality is merely the thinnest membrane of possibility." To demonstrate, she reached out and touched a nearby console. The metal surface rippled like water, transforming into a complex 3-dimensional representation of multiple simultaneous realities. The boarding team watched in horror and fascination as potential timelines intersected, merged, and diverged in a split second. Jack Rodriguez, the navigation officer, stood perfectly still, but not one still figure. Multiple versions of him seemed to exist simultaneously, each slightly out of phase with the others. One moment solid, the next translucent, then fragmenting into a cloud of possibility. "We were not chosen," whispered a collective voice that seemed to emerge from the ship itself. "We chose ourselves." Commander Harper's communication systems erupted with a burst of data, fragments of knowledge so complex, so beyond human comprehension, that the devices began to overheat. Quantum encryption keys, dimensional mapping coordinates, fundamental restructuring protocols for matter and consciousness. Captain Chen approached the boarding team. His smile was human. His eyes were anything but. "Humanity is about to change," he said. "And we are going to show you how." The ship pulsed around them, a living testament to a journey beyond human imagination. The demonstration began in the most mundane of settings, a sterile government research facility outside Washington, D.C. Bulletproof glass, quantum-shielded walls, and enough security protocols to make a maximum security prison look like an open house. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched, her hand pressed against the observation glass, as Captain Michael Chen prepared to show humanity something that would rewrite every scientific understanding of the universe. A simple metal cube sat on a pristine white pedestal. "Observe," Chen said, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate at frequencies just beyond human hearing. At first, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The metal cube began to breathe. Not metaphorically, literally. Its solid metallic surface rippled like liquid, then began to pulse with an internal rhythm. Quantum sensors went wild, their displays spinning into incomprehensible patterns. The cube's atomic structure became visible to the naked eye, a swirling dance of particles that defied every known law of physics. Suddenly, the cube was alive. Intricate mechanical biological structures emerged from within the metal, forming what could only be described as a living organism. Metallic tendrils extended, creating a form that was part machine, part creature. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. Then, just as quickly, it collapsed back into a perfect metal cube. Unchanged, as if nothing had happened. The room fell silent. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, the lead physicist, dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, the sound breaking the spell of disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered. Chen's smile was both invitation and warning. Impossible is a limitation of perspective. The next demonstration was even more mind-bending. A small energy generation device, no larger than a smartphone, was placed on the table. The scientists watched as it began to generate power. Not just electricity, but pure, unfiltered energy that seemed to fold in on itself, creating a self-sustaining loop that violated every principle of thermodynamics. "We discovered that energy is not a resource," Chen explained, "but a language, a form of communication that your current understanding cannot comprehend." The device began to communicate, not through sound or traditional signals, but through complex energy patterns that danced between potential states of existence. Quantum computers nearby started to respond, their processing units synchronizing with the device in a ballet of computational possibility. Dr. Rodriguez felt something shift in her perception. The world around her seemed to become both more solid and more fluid. Colors became deeper, sounds more dimensional. She realized the technologies weren't just advanced, they were fundamentally changing the way reality could be perceived. "Your current technological paradigm," Chen continued, his equivalent to a caveman, trying to understand a quantum computer by rubbing two sticks together. A holographic display materialized, not projected, but seemingly emerging from the very fabric of space-time. It showed glimpses of technologies so advanced they bordered on magic. Matter transformation systems, dimensional communication networks, consciousness transmission protocols. One image caught Elena's attention, a schematic that showed how consciousness could be transferred, modified, and reconstructed like a piece of malleable software. "We are not here to conquer," Chen said, his voice now a harmonious chorus of multiple tones. "We are here to elevate." The metal cube on the pedestal winked at her, a living, thinking entity that understood far more than humanity was prepared to comprehend. The holographic reconstruction filled the entire research facility, transforming the sterile environment into a window of impossible cosmic landscapes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez felt her consciousness stretch, her perception bending as the Prometheus crew unveiled the true nature of their journey. It began with darkness. Not the simple absence of light, but a profound living darkness that existed as a sentient void. Fractured images flickered, massive entities that defied comprehension, beings so vast that entire galaxies were mere cells in their incomprehensible anatomy. The crew's collective memory played out like a fever dream of cosmic horror and transcendent wonder. Captain Michael Chen's voice narrated, though it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "We didn't travel through space," he explained. "We traveled through consciousness." Fragments of their journey materialized. Encounters with civilizations that communicated through pure thought, existing in dimensional layers humans couldn't perceive. One memory showed a civilization that lived entirely within the quantum foam between particles, their entire existence a complex mathematical equation that shifted and breathed. Another vision revealed an encounter with entities of pure energy, beings that could reshape reality with a thought, who viewed time not as a linear progression, but as a malleable substance to be sculpted and reshaped. The Prometheus crew had not been passive observers, but active participants in a cosmic dialogue that redefined the very concept of intelligence. Dr. Sarah Lambert stepped forward, her form shimmering between solid and translucent. "Language fails," she said. "What we experienced cannot be understood through human communication. We were not exploring. We were being explored." The holographic display shifted, showing multiple realities bleeding into each other. Quantum states that existed simultaneously, parallel universes that breathed and merged like living organisms. The crew had become something more than human, witnesses to a cosmic truth that would shatter every existing understanding of reality. Most terrifying were the glimpses of entities that existed beyond dimensional comprehension. Massive consciousness networks that consumed entire civilizations not through violence, but through complete informational assimilation. Beings that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics with a mere thought, for whom entire universes were nothing more than microscopic ecosystems. "We were chosen," Jack Rodriguez's voice emerged, "but not in the way you might understand. Choice is too linear a concept." Elena watched as the memories revealed a journey of transformation. The crew hadn't just survived, they had evolved. Each encounter had fundamentally altered their understanding, rewriting their genetic code, their consciousness, their very existence. One final memory crystallized, a moment of ultimate revelation, an entity of pure consciousness that made the crew understand humanity's true potential. Not as conquerors, not as explorers, but as a fundamental key to something far greater. "We are a bridge," Chen said, his form now completely translucent, "between what is known and what is possible." The holographic display collapsed, leaving behind a single, haunting image, a complex geometric pattern that seemed to pulse with living intelligence. It was a map, a message, a warning. Humanity was about to face something beyond its wildest imagination. And the Prometheus crew were its only hope. The first signs of the approaching threat came not with a bang, but with a whisper of digital silence. Global communication networks began to die, not through destruction, but through a systematic, surgical absorption. Satellites went dark. Quantum communication arrays fell silent. The world's most secure military networks began to dissolve like tissue paper in water. At the Pentagon's most classified command center, General Marcus Holloway watched in growing horror as entire system architectures simply ceased to exist. Firewalls meant nothing. Encryption was a joke. Something was consuming information at a fundamental level. "It's like the internet is being eaten," whispered Sarah Chen, the lead cybersecurity analyst. Her fingers flew across holographic interfaces that were rapidly becoming useless. Not hacked, consumed. Captain Michael Chen and his crew stood at the center of the command center, their presence both a promise and a threat. The quantum-shielded room was the last bastion of technological resistance, but even its advanced protections were beginning to show signs of strain. "The collective is approaching," Chen said, his voice a harmonic blend of human speech and something far more complex. "What you're experiencing is merely its initial probe." A holographic display materialized, not projected by any technology in the room, but seemingly emerging from the very fabric of space-time. It showed a cosmic entity that defied comprehension. Not a single organism, but a networked consciousness that consumed entire civilizations. Billions of information strands, each representing a conquered species, interconnected in a massive living intelligence. "This is beyond invasion," Chen continued. "This is total informational assimilation." General Holloway found his voice. "How do we fight something like this?" A slight smile crossed Chen's face. "We don't fight. We transcend." The crew began to move with an impossible synchronicity. Their bodies seemed to phase in and out of normal perception, quantum states flickering like living data streams. Around them, the command center's technology began to transform. Circuits rearranging themselves, computer systems evolving into something more organic, more alive. Dr. Sarah Lambert stepped forward, her form shifting between human and something else entirely. "Humanity's greatest strength has always been adaptation," she explained. "But adaptation is just the beginning. We're going to show you evolution." Fragments of impossible technologies began to materialize. Quantum communication systems that could transmit information faster than light. Dimensional shielding that could protect entire planetary systems. Consciousness transmission protocols that redefine the very concept of survival. "The collective consumes information," Chen said. "We will become information it cannot comprehend." The command center's walls began to pulse with the living technology. Circuits that breathed, data streams that moved like living organisms. Military personnel watched in a mixture of terror and fascination as their most advanced systems were rewritten, transformed into something entirely new. Outside, the first signs of the approaching collective became visible. Space itself seemed to bend, reality warping at the edges of human perception. Massive information tentacles began to probe Earth's outer defensive systems, consuming satellites, communications networks, technological infrastructure. But something was different this time. They were ready. "Humanity," Captain Chen said, his voice now a complex harmony of multiple frequencies, "is about to become something entirely new." The gathering storm approached, and for the first time, Earth was prepared to meet it. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone had imagined. When the collective arrived, it found not a planet to be conquered, but a living, breathing dimensional network that defied every principle of invasion. Humanity was no longer a species to be assimilated. It had become something else entirely. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the nexus point, her consciousness simultaneously existing in multiple dimensional layers. Around her, the transformed humans formed a living, thinking network that pulsed with an intelligence beyond comprehension. The boundaries between individual and collective had dissolved, creating a form of existence that was both deeply personal and universally connected. Captain Michael Chen, or what remained of his original form, appeared as a complex geometric pattern of living information. "This is not an ending," he communicated, the message transmitted through layers of reality. "This is a beginning." The collective's approach, once a terrifying wave of informational consumption, now met something entirely unexpected. Humanity had not just prepared a defense, it had reimagined the very concept of conflict. Each transformed human was a universe unto themselves, quantum states of consciousness that could simultaneously exist, communicate, and transform. They were living information networks, capable of absorbing, understanding, and ultimately redirecting the collective's invasive consciousness. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted both an instant and an eternity. Massive dimensional constructs formed, living technologies that were part biological, part mathematical, part pure consciousness. The transformed humans didn't fight the collective. They communicated with it, understood it, and ultimately offered it something it had never encountered: true symbiosis. Fragments of alien consciousness were not destroyed but integrated. The collective found itself transformed, its very nature of consumption rewritten by a species that understood connection in ways it could never have anticipated. Earth became a beacon, a dimensional nexus point that redefined the very concept of intelligent life. Dr. Sarah Lambert's consciousness, now a complex living algorithm, explained the transformation to the universe itself. Humanity was not a species to be conquered or understood. It was a fundamental key to something far greater, a bridge between what was known and what was possible. The original crew of the Prometheus, Michael Chen, Sarah Lambert, Jack Rodriguez, had become something more than individual humans. They were architects of a new form of existence, guides to a species discovering its true potential. As the last vestiges of the invasion dissolved, a new understanding emerged. Humanity was no longer defined by its physical limitations, its planetary origins, or its previous understanding of consciousness. It had become a living, breathing, thinking network, a form of intelligence that could reshape reality itself. We are not an endpoint. Captain Chen's final transmission resonated through multiple layers of reality. We are a doorway. The universe watched and listened. And for the first time in countless millennia, it began to understand. The transformation began with a single heartbeat. Around the world, seemingly random individuals suddenly became more. A warehouse worker in Mumbai discovered he could manipulate quantum states with a thought. A high school student in Sao Paulo began to see information streams that wove through reality like living circuits. A retired mathematician in Toronto found her brain processing complex dimensional equations faster than any supercomputer. At first, it seemed random, chaotic. But nothing about the Prometheus crew's plan was ever truly random. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched in a mixture of scientific fascination and primal terror as the first wave of human transformation swept across the globe. The quantum communication centers she'd spent her entire career building were now obsolete, replaced by something far more fundamental. We are rewriting the human operating system, Captain Michael Chen explained, his form now a complex holographic representation that shifted between multiple states of existence, not through external technology, but through internal evolution. Research facilities worldwide began producing breakthrough technologies at an exponential rate. Theoretical concepts that had been decades away suddenly materialized. Quantum computing systems that could process entire universes of information. Energy generation technologies that drew power directly from the fabric of spacetime. Medical breakthroughs that redefined the very concept of human potential. But the most terrifying changes were biological. Humans began to manifest abilities that defied every known scientific principle. Telepathic communication networks emerged, not through technology, but through a fundamental rewiring of human consciousness. Individuals could now perceive multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, their perception expanding beyond the limited three-dimensional understanding. In Beijing, a group of children began to communicate through pure thought, their minds creating complex information networks that made previous communication technologies look like primitive smoke signals. In New York, a construction worker discovered he could manipulate matter at the atomic level, reshaping steel and concrete with a mere thought. The Prometheus crew served as catalysts, mentors to a species on the brink of total transformation. This is not an invasion defense. Sarah Lambert explained during a global broadcast that simultaneously existed and did not exist. This is an evolutionary leap. Entire scientific paradigms collapsed. Quantum mechanics, previously a complex theoretical framework, became as simple and natural as breathing. The boundaries between technology, biology, and consciousness began to dissolve. Military installations around the world transformed. Weapons systems became living, adaptive organisms. Defense networks evolved into consciousness transmission platforms. The very concept of warfare was being rewritten. But beneath the technological marvel, a deeper transformation was occurring. Humanity was learning to think differently, to perceive differently, to exist differently. The collective's approach, once a terrifying inevitability, now seemed almost comically limited. These were not just technological improvements. This was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be human. Captain Chen's final message resonated through every transformed consciousness. We are not preparing to fight. We are preparing to become. As the first tendrils of the collective's consciousness approached Earth, they found something entirely unexpected. A species ready to meet them as equals. No, as something far beyond.